Hi, and welcome to the podcast, How'd You Do That? And today I have a special guest, Josh Steimle. Josh is a founder of Influencer Inc. and MWI and has written over 300 articles for publications such as Forbes, Fortune, and Fast Company. He speaks on the topic of personal branding, influence, and thought leadership. He has spoken internationally and as well has delivered a TED Talk. Welcome, Josh. So glad to have you on our show today.
Thank you, Nina, for having me.
Thank you. So just to begin, I don't know if a lot of people know who you are, but I thought if you could briefly discuss what you do, you can give them an idea of exactly what field that you're in.
Well, as you mentioned, I started a marketing agency called MWI, so I'm the founder there. That was 20 years ago. I was a college student when I started that. And then more recently, I started another company called Influencer Inc. And MWI is a marketing branding type company for companies. And Influencer Inc. is kind of a marketing and branding company for people. And so I play on those two sides of things, helping companies and helping people with their marketing and branding. And Influencer Inc. came out of an interest I had in personal branding because that's how I grew my first company, was through writing and speaking and social media. And so as I built up some career capital or expertise with that, then that led me to this place where I wanted to help people do the same thing that I had done. And so that's where that second company came from.
It's amazing. And so how did you get to that level that you knew that you wanted to start up this company called MWI and then slowly, got into Influencer Inc.?
I think entrepreneurship is something that runs in people's blood. And I started businesses when I was a little kid. I was always looking to make extra money somehow. And so if I wasn't doing extra odd jobs around the house, I was doing odd jobs for the neighbors. I was recycling newspapers and cans and selling candy at school. I was just always doing little things here and there. And when I got the opportunity in the late 90s to work for a .com, and I saw how exciting it was that people were starting businesses and they were writing business plans on the backs of napkins and raising VC money and all this, I thought, this is what I want to do. This looks so exciting. Yeah. And I was in college at the time, so I thought, well, what can I do on the side while I'm in college? And I knew I had picked up some web design skills, so I thought, well, hey, I'll start a web design agency. And so that became MWI. It was just an outgrowth of something that I had a little bit of talent in. And I started that business, and there's a lot of ups and downs and details there, but that was the genesis of it. Was really just looking around me at everybody else starting businesses and saying, hey, if they can do it, why can't I do it?
Right. And then that led you to eventually to Influencer Inc. as well?
Right. And the way that happened is with MWI kind of failed its way forward from 1999 until about 2013. People hear that and they're like, wait, you failed for 13 years? Like, why would you keep doing this if it was failing? Right. And the thing is, success was always just around the corner. So every month, every week, every year, it seemed like we were on the verge of really big success with MWI. And it was going along, it was surviving, but it wasn't becoming the big thing I wanted it to become either. But it was always so close to that. And so that just kept me going. And it was exciting. It was interesting. Whereas every other job I've had in my life, I either got fired from or I quit within 5 months. This was the first job where every day I woke up and I thought, wow, I don't know what to do. This is exciting. I'm learning every single day.
Right.
So in 2013, the business really hit a rough patch, though. We made a bad hire and we lost a bunch of clients because of this person we hired. We fired that person, but then we were in this situation where we didn't have the client base that we once had, and we were in danger of going out of business. And I turned to a friend of mine, and she was a PR expert, and I said, hey, is there something we could do on the PR side to get some clients in here fast? Can you help me out? And she said, you should be writing for these magazines. I shouldn't be writing stories about you or getting stories about you in here. You should be writing for these publications. And I enjoyed writing, but I had no experience writing for any sort of big publication. And I thought, well, gee, I don't know how to do this. I don't have time to do this. But she made an intro to her editor at Forbes and kind of pushed me into it. And I went along with it, but I didn't really know what was going to come out of it. And in the end, that writing for Forbes, which I really enjoyed and I really took to it, I felt like I had found my calling as a writer. But that writing for Forbes ended up generating millions of dollars for my agency. I can now track back probably over $10 million in revenue for my agency as a result of writing for Forbes and then other publications, and the attention that came from that. So it became this amazing opportunity to write for these publications, and it was great for the business. And it was out of that the new business Influencer Inc. launched, because once people saw that I had the success, they started coming to me and saying, hey, I want to do this for my business. How do I get into Forbes? How do I get on the TEDx stage? How do I write a book? And so I just started coaching people through this process, and that turned into this new business, Influencer Inc.
Wow, that's amazing. And so what kept you going? I mean, like from MWI, like you were mentioning earlier that there was a 13-year gap or not gap, but 13 years where you weren't really making much. I mean, you persevered and you kept going and you were very persistent. So what was it that didn't make you stop?
Well, part of it was just being stubborn and perhaps a bit foolish. I mean, maybe I should have stopped and done something else, but I had my ego involved, and I felt like, I don't want to let this die. I'm going to make this work. I'm going to keep on working at it. So there was some stubbornness there. Also, I'd kind of dug myself into a hole where I didn't really have many other options. I had taken on a lot of business debt early in the business, and the idea of quitting and going and getting a 9-to-5 job with a stable salary was very appealing on the one hand, but on the other hand, I knew that if I did that, it was going to take me the next 30 years to pay off all the business debt I had built up.
Right.
And so the only option I felt like I really had was to keep running the business, hope that things would work out and that I could pay off this debt a little bit faster. And so I kind of trapped myself, but at the same time, I wasn't really built for working for any other type of company or anybody else necessarily. Now, the joke is I gave up one boss to have 50 bosses because every one of my clients is another boss.
Right.
But still, working for my own business, I felt like I was in control. I felt like I was controlling my destiny. And it's very hard for me to give up calling the shots like that and go back to work for somebody full time.
Right. And that makes sense, because I know at the end of the day, it would be nice to be your own boss, and instead of taking on other I guess extra work that sometimes you're really not wanting to do, right? So that makes sense. So what other hurdles did you face? Like, I mean, I know you said that there was a 13-year gap, not gap, but 13-year where business wasn't doing as well. Was there any other hurdles along the way that you faced that made it more difficult or more challenging?
Every challenge I faced has been me. I mean, I've always been the problem in the picture, because I saw other companies around me that were doing the same thing, started at the same time, and they didn't go into debt, and they were making a lot more revenue, and they were profitable. And so I'd look at these businesses and I'd say, what's the difference here? What are they doing? I mean, did they get lucky? And yeah, in some cases you'd say, well, they landed this client and that led to this and this, and so maybe they got lucky. But after 13 years of failing, you kind of have to look at yourself and say, this is probably just me. There's probably something I'm doing wrong here. And I had known there were problems for a long time, but really, what really woke me up was in 2007, I hit rock bottom. I had not been paid in 4 years. I hadn't taken a dime out of the company. I was paying everybody else. I was paying my employees, and I was getting a salary of exactly zero. And I was going in the hole. I was going into debt all this time. So after 4 years of that, I got to this point where I said, I'm working 100-hour weeks. I'm not getting paid. There's no light at the end of the tunnel at this point, and I'm sitting in front of a computer all day long. I'm sleeping on the floor at the office, and I was very unhealthy. I was eating fast food, junk food, and I just thought, I'm going to die young if I keep this up. I mean, this just cannot go on. This has been going on for 4 years now.
Wow.
And so I hit this rock bottom point. I just said, I've got to do something. And so I got back into the gym. That was the first thing I did, because I didn't know what to do to fix the business, but I knew that I could fix my health by getting back in the gym and starting to eat better. So I started doing that. And a funny thing happens when you lift up one area of your life, you can't stay down in the other areas. You get the motivation to lift up those other areas. It becomes uncomfortable to do a good job in one area of your life and then be failing at other areas that you know you should be doing better at. So
Right.
once I got my health better, it kind of pulled up everything else. And I started making better decisions in other areas. And thinking more outside the box about how to fix my business. And so that all started in January of 2007. And by the end of 2007, I was getting paid. I was paying off debt. I was healthier. My wife and I were in the process of starting our family and adopting our first child. So just all these things started happening in 2007. But none of it happened until I hit rock bottom, and I kind of gave up and said, I quit. This isn't working. And the first decision I made was, I'm going to stop working 100-hour weeks, and I'm going to drop down to 30, 40 hours a week, work a normal work week. And I didn't know how I could do that. I thought that would put the company out of business. But once I did that, the interesting thing was that I started making better decisions about how to spend my time. Right. And all of a sudden, the business started doing better. It was almost like magic. Wow.
It's like you just connected with yourself, and then everything connected as well. Like all the dots were connected soon after. That's an amazing. It's funny how we think that we need to work longer, we need to work harder, and we need to do much more than, and what we actually find out is when there's simplicity in what we do and how we do it, that things just kind of fall in place.
Yeah, I'm a real fan of boundaries, clear boundaries for yourself, because life throws boundaries at you. I mean, you can only stay awake so many hours in the week. That's a natural boundary. But in that, I was pushing up against that boundary for 7 years. But when I was pushing up against the natural boundaries, I felt like I had unlimited time. There was always more time to do more projects, more stuff, try new things. And once I cut back to 40, that was an artificial boundary that I created for myself. But that made me feel like, hey, wait a second, I don't have unlimited time anymore. So what am I going to spend my time on? Because I can't do everything I want to do. And so I started cutting out a lot of things that were wasting time. And that's where the big changes came from. We're setting those artificial boundaries on myself.
That's wonderful, and it's so good that you're sharing that with us, because a lot of people think that oh no, you get to the top and you get to the top very quickly, and there's no hurdles, there's no issues. But yeah, there are issues and there are problems, and we work through them and eventually get to where we need to get to. And so I think that's very inspiring. And for people for individuals who want to start up their own business, and this is actually, great information for them, especially for the ones who think that they have to work longer hours and work crazy time. So just to make sure that they get all the ends meet. Really quickly, you were talking, or in your website, you have a book that you had written, CMOs at Work. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So the way this book came about was that I was in Hong Kong. I was living there in Asia, opening up an office for my agency. And we had a contract that was ready to be signed with a client company. And we walked in to sign this contract, and there was a new face in the room that we didn't know. And this is always a bad sign when you go to close a deal if there's somebody new there. And so we started talking, and then we got ready to sign this deal, and this woman spoke up and she said, "Oh, wait a second. I'm the new CMO here. I was just hired yesterday. We're not signing any new marketing contracts until I do an audit and figure out what's going on here." So she just killed our deal right there. That was it. We've been working on this deal for several weeks. And I walked out and I thought, man, that stinks. But I recognize the power that these CMOs or VPs of marketing have. And so I went back to my team at MWI and I said, maybe we should write a book about digital marketing for CMOs or something. And I like to write. I've been writing for Forbes and these other publications. I know how to write business stuff. So I'll go write this book, Digital Marketing for CMOs. And this will give us credibility with our target market. So I started writing this book, and then I realized I don't really know what it's like to be a CMO. I've never been one. I've worked with a lot, but I don't really understand their world. And a few years earlier, I had read a book called Founders at Work by Jessica Livingston. She's one of the main people at Y Combinator. And I really liked this book. It was just 20 or 30 interviews with famous founders of successful companies. And I thought, well, maybe there's a book in this series about CMOs, and I can go read that, and then I'll really understand CMOs. So I went searching for this book, and I couldn't find it. But I ended up on the publisher's website and found out that they were inviting people to write different books for this series, this At Work series. Right. So I emailed them and I said, hey, I want to write the CMOs at Work book. and this will help me prepare for writing this other book for CMOs.
Right.
And so I sent them a pitch. They sent me a contract and said, great, let's go. They sent me an advance. And that's how I got the deal to write this book. And then I had to go out and find CMOs to interview. So I went out and I contacted hundreds of CMOs, and I ended up getting interviews with CMOs from PayPal and Spotify and Twitter and a bunch of these different companies. And it ended up just being this amazing experience writing this book and getting to interview these marketing heroes of mine. And I never got around to writing the second book, actually. I wrote the first book, and it kind of did the job of giving us some credibility, because now we walk into companies and we give them a copy of this book and say, hey, here's the book on CMOs that our CEO wrote, and we get a lot of credibility and mileage out of that. So I never really got around to that second one.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that's amazing that you wrote a book, and that's your expertise now, right? It's the digital marketing and marketing, as well as understanding CMOs, right?
Yeah, and the funny thing about a book is like a business card on steroids. When you have a book, it gives you all sorts of credibility, and it's one of the best marketing tools out there that we've found. It's once you have a book, people just assume that you know what you're talking about. And the other side of a book is it takes a ton of work. This book, I thought, oh, it's going to write itself. I'm just going to interview people. I'll transcribe them, slap it together. I've got a book. It was still a ton of work. So now I look at anybody who's written a book and I think, wow, I have so much respect for anybody who's written a book, even if it's a bad book, because I know how much work goes into it.
Right. And so the book's been written. You've got these two amazing companies. Is there currently anything that you're working on right now that you want to share with us?
So I'm working on more books now. So I did write a book on LinkedIn called 60 Days to LinkedIn Mastery. That's coming out May 2020. So I'm working with a publisher on that right now. It's in the final stages. And all of this is really leading up towards the book I really wanted to write for the past several years, which is called 7 Systems of Influence. And this is a formula book on how to create and maintain influence. And not just influence in the sense of, oh, I want to go on Instagram or YouTube and be one of these influencers and stand in front of sports cars and big houses. It's not that kind of influence. It's more the leadership, the more day-to-day influence that we have, whether we're entrepreneurs or parents or teachers. It's more that type of influence and studying the science of how influence works. So I'm hoping to finish that up this year. So that's where a lot of my time is focused these days, is on content creation and writing these books.
Right. And I know that you also had done the TED Talk in Hong Kong. Can you give us more insight about what you spoke about this TED Talk, or in this TED Talk?
Yeah. So TEDx Talks are kind of a funny thing in that so you've got TED, which is the head body, and they run their TED Talks. And then you've got these local licensees that get these TEDx licenses. And these can be anybody. I mean, there are tons of these people all around the world that have these local TEDx licenses. So in Hong Kong, one of the people who has a TEDx license there, which means he can put on TEDx events and use their brand and name and everything, happened to be a friend of mine. And so most people, they have to go in and they have to audition for these TEDx talks, and they have to do a lot of work to get in. And then sometimes these TEDx events are really small. They might have 50 or 60 people in attendance. Well, this Hong Kong one, they had over 1,000 people at this event. And to get in, all I had to do is go to my friend and say, hey, can I do this? And he's like, yeah, sure, you're in. And that was it. Like, I didn't do any audition. And so I see people online, they're like, oh, I'm auditioning for TEDx. I'm so nervous, all this stuff. I'm like, auditioning? How does that work? I didn't audition at all. I just went and asked the head guy if I could do it. So I got in pretty easily there to do the TEDx talk. But then, of course, I had to actually give it. And I committed to myself. I was like, I'm going to spend months preparing for this, and I'm going to practice for 2 months ahead of time. And when I go in there, I'm just going to nail it. I'm going to give the best TEDx talk ever. And instead, at 3 a.m. the night before, I was finishing up my slide deck, and I hadn't slept at all. And then I'm in Hong Kong, so I had to catch a boat and then a bus and subway to get to this venue. So I didn't sleep at all the night before. And I get there and I'm just super tired. I'm worn out. I'm kind of flustered because I didn't prepare 2 months ahead of time like I said I was going to do. Right. And then I gave my TEDx talk with zero practice. I mean, I hadn't run through it once when I gave it. And I think it went okay, but it definitely didn't go as well as I thought it would go. But to date, I think I checked it the other day. It's up on YouTube. I think it's up to about 180,000 views or something. And so it's out there. It wasn't focused on anything business. It was focused on homeschooling and education and children, because my wife and I are homeschoolers, and that's something that I'm passionate about, that I care a lot about. And that's what the focus of this TEDx event was too, was education. So I gave that TEDx talk, and it was an amazing experience, but the next time I'll definitely be more prepared for it.
I know in the TEDx talk, you did talk about that a lot of these children who do get homeschooled, they do get invited to go to the top schools. I mean, I think that's really impressive. Do you want to say a few words about that, or?
Yeah, I mean, homeschooling is an interesting thing. I gave this talk, this was 2013, 2014. So, I mean, it's been 6 years or so since I gave it. And that's when we were just starting to homeschool. So here I am on stage saying, we're going to homeschool and it's going to be awesome and all these great things are going to happen. Well, now 6 years into it, yeah, a lot of what I thought back then has been reality, but there's some lessons I've learned along the way. And I've realized, man, homeschooling is a ton of work. And my wife, this is her full-time job, is homeschooling our kids. And I work from home so that I can be involved as well. So I'm here too. And it takes a ton of time and it takes a lot of work. And there's a lot of just research and prep and stuff. And we're not super regimented. Like, we don't have a really strong structure to how we run things. We're kind of into this whole unschooling thing where it's self-directed education. You focus on what the kids are interested in and you help them and promote that. But no matter how you do it, it's still going to be a lot of time and it's a lot of work. It's not like you just leave them on the computer all day or something. Right. So I have a lot more empathy for parents who don't homeschool now. Whereas back then I was kind of like, everybody should homeschool. This is the right way to do it. If you don't homeschool, you're a bad parent. That's kind of how I thought back then. And now I'm like, you know what? This isn't for everybody. It's hard. Some people logistically just cannot make it work, even if they want to. Right. And I've also learned, like, it's not always the right thing for every kid. We just adopted a child from China a few months ago, and she's 14 years old, and she grew up at a boarding school. She's used to a lot of structure, and she's been struggling with our homeschool routine and how it's just kind of like you do whatever you want to do. Like, she doesn't know what to do with all this free time. And so we brought up the other day, we're like, do you want to go to like a normal school? And she's like, yes, I want to go to a normal school. And we're like, you know, maybe this would be good for her to learn English and make friends and stuff. I mean, yeah, she's friends with her other kids here, but we realized, you know, for her, homeschooling might not be the right fit, or maybe it's not the right fit right now. Maybe it will be in 2 years, but right now, maybe it's not. And so we're trying to figure stuff out and experiment, but I'm a bit more open-minded than I was a few years ago when I gave that talk.
Wow, that's really impressive. I mean, from being an entrepreneur to delivering a talk on homeschooling children, I think it's amazing. I mean, you're like a jack of all trades. You got everything going.
Too many things going, I think some people would say. My wife would probably say I've got too many things.
So, what are you passionate about? I mean, you talked about business. I know you talked about you're passionate about entrepreneurship and your family. Is there anything else? I mean, that you're passionate about that's kind of helped you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to delve into the really personal side of things, I mean, really for me, everything that drives me goes back to my religious beliefs and my beliefs about why we're here on earth and our spiritual side and what I believe about God and such. And so everything I do, whether it's business or education, it's really all centered around that. I was actually meeting with one of my clients a few weeks ago, and he was talking about a methodology he has for how we confront change in our lives and how we deal with things. Because there's this idea that you can blueprint your life the same way that you blueprint a house. And this just isn't reality. Even with a house, ask anybody who's built their own house and they'll tell you that the house they end up with is not the house that they design at the beginning of the process. Things change along the way. You might say, hey, I want to do the bathroom this way, but then you start building it and you realize, oh, the tub that I wanted, they don't make that anymore. So now I have to go find a different tub. Or you might find out, now that I'm actually like walking into this framed out room, this isn't big enough. We've got to change this. I mean, you make changes along the way. And so his main point when we were chatting the other day was, everything changes. You don't know where you're starting from, really. You don't know where you're going to end up. So how do you deal with life when everything's uncertain? And he said it all ties back to identity, figuring out who you are at your core, because then you have an anchor that in no matter what the situation is, you say, well, is this reinforcing my identity? Is this helping me to maximize my potential within who I really am at my core? And for me, I'm a son of God. I'm a child of God, and that anchors everything. So it's, okay, so with my job choices, am I choosing a job or a profession that ties back to that key identity? When I educate my children, is that tied back to that core identity of who I am? And that's really what determines everything in my life. Every decision that I make every day, as much as I can, I'm trying to tie it back to that core identity to say, is this who I really want to be? Is this reinforcing who I want to be?
Right. Okay. And you talked about in your in your website, you mentioned about meeting up with Richard Branson or going on to his private island for the weekend. You were invited there. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think that's very interesting that you got invited there. That's really impressive.
It's still surreal to me. I mean, that was a couple of years ago, and the way it happened is I wrote that book, Chief Marketing Officers at Work, and a few months after the book came out, I got an email from this woman, and she said, hey, I read your book, and we'd like to invite you to this event on Necker Island owned by Richard Branson. We're going to have all these top marketers there. And I looked at this email, and I don't get these kinds of emails. It's not like my inbox is flooded with invitations to go hang out with Richard Branson. So I was looking at this email, I'm like, okay, this is spam. And I almost deleted it. And then I was like, well, wait a second, but she said she read my book, and that's customized information that people don't generally put in a spam email. So I took a closer look at it, and I thought, oh, okay, I know what this is. This is one of those events where they have these big names and they want to bring you there, but then it's like 50 grand or something. It's some outrageous price. And so I thought, okay, yeah, this is one of those things. But there was still something, the fact that she had mentioned my book and knew something about me, I thought, you know what, even then, maybe I should just see what this is about. So I responded and I said, this sounds like an amazing event, but what's the catch? How much does this thing cost? And she wrote back, she's like, no, you just have to get yourself here, but then we've got your lodging covered for a whole week. You're going to hang out on this island. This is legit. And you're one of 80 people that we're inviting to this event. It's not like we're trying to get 30,000 people on board and there's no charge. We're not making any money off of it. So then I realized, oh, this is like a real thing. And so I bought my tickets. I flew there. They put me up in this amazing resort there for a week next to Necker Island. And every day they'd pick me up and take me over to Necker Island on a boat. And I hang out in the Caribbean. And then the first night that we were there at Necker Island, here comes Richard Branson. And there's just 80 of us. And we're hanging out with him and taking photos and chatting and stuff. And I spent a week there with the heads of some of the largest marketing agencies in the world. And the whole time I was thinking, I'm the smallest guy here. I wrote a book. That's all I've done. I've got a tiny agency and I wrote a book. That's why I'm here. And I'm sitting with this guy who controls $14 billion in ad spend every year. And he's sitting next to Richard Branson. And then there's the head of Time Magazine. And there's one of the founders from Foursquare and one of the executives from Twitter. And I'm just thinking, how did I get here? This is amazing. But yeah, it was just a surreal experience. And it was really eye-opening and inspiring to see that these people were normal people. They weren't all that different than I was. They were just discussing numbers with more zeros at the end. But in terms of the work they were doing and how smart they were, it wasn't like they were geniuses. They were normal people who had worked up and were doing great things. They were very confident people. I'll give them that. They were very confident and they knew what they wanted and they just went and they did it. But it was an amazing experience.
Well, that's awesome. And did you get time to spend with Richard Branson or?
Just a little bit. I talked with him a little bit in one of the dinner lines one night, and it's kind of funny. He's different in person than you would assume that he is. I mean, when you're talking to him in person, he's just a normal guy, and he's a little bit goofy and he stumbles over his words just like everybody else. And I thought, this is just a normal guy who's obviously very driven and very visionary, but he's not like Superman or something. He's a normal person.
Wow, that's great. And is there anything else that you want to share with us about your values or beliefs that has shaped you into who you are today? I know you've talked a little bit about religion, and you talked about just your fondness for entrepreneurship and family.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who have impacted me for sure. My mom is one of the people I give so much credit to because she taught me how to read, and she taught me how to love reading. And everything that I am today seems to tie back to that somehow. I mean, I'm a writer, and the reason I can write is because I read a lot, and I read a lot because my mom taught me to love reading. And she bought me all the books that I ever wanted and took me to the library. And so my mom has had a big impact on me that way. And my father had a big impact on me because he taught me lessons about integrity and keeping my word and honoring who I am. And then, of course, my wife, who has supported me through all the crazy ideas that I've put her through. I mean, think about it. I went 4 years without getting paid. And so how was I living? My wife was working during that time. She supported us for 4 years and allowed me to play around with the business and not bring any money home for 4 years.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
let me work 100-hour weeks. And so she was very patient with me, and I wouldn't be here except that she was willing to go along with that ride.
That's amazing. And hats off to her and your family who've been there, behind you to support you. That's really wonderful. And I just wanted to say thank you, Josh. You've been nothing but wonderful in providing and this information, so that if perhaps somebody tomorrow wants to go ahead and do something like yourself, that they know exactly what to do. I mean, I think it's a great lesson learned that you've been writing, you're not getting paid for that, but you're getting exposure, you're getting that openness to bringing in more clients. I think it's wonderful, and your website gave me so much information that you provided today as well. So again, it's great. Is there any last words that you'd like to say before we leave?
Just that anybody listening to this, the people I really like to speak to are the people who are down about themselves, about their career prospects, about their business if they're running a business, because I've been there. I was at a place with my business at many points where I didn't know what to do. I felt like a failure. I felt like things were hopeless. I felt like my life was ruined because of the bad decisions I had made about the business and the mess that I had got it into. And yet things do work out. You do find solutions. You find people you can work with, and you work through it. And yeah, it might take a long time, and you might be kind of embarrassed because your friends seem to be doing really well and getting rich, and their businesses are going well, or their careers are doing really well, and you feel like you're getting behind. But now my friends come to me, and whenever we get together, they're like, "Oh man, I wish I was doing what you were doing," or something. I'm like, yeah, but you don't know what it costs to get here. Right. But now I have an amazing life. I mean, it really was amazing all the way along. It was just hard at times, but right. I appreciate it more now looking back, because I can see that, even when it was hard, it was still kind of fun. I was learning a lot. I was progressing. It was energizing every day. And now I'm so much better off for having gone through those hard times, because I've learned a lot of lessons. And one of the most important things I want to pass on to people is that it does work out, and that you can do this, and you can push forward, and you can find ways to make it work.
Right. And I think that's a great way to end the segment. And, at the end of the day, it's all about what you do and not what others do. And others we are always comparing ourselves to others, but at the end of the day, that doesn't matter, because what matters is we're living our life for ourselves and for our families. And I think that is the most important thing. And when we stop comparing ourselves and we do things that's right for us, we actually, when we find our passion and we grow, we do become successful, like yourself.
Yeah. It's a sad thing when somebody tries to live their life as somebody else, and then they get to the end of their life and realize, I didn't do what I wanted to do. I did what somebody else wanted to do, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. Exactly. And that's not to say that there aren't commitments that we should make and keep. I mean, sometimes we make a commitment, like to raise a family or to be a spouse, And sometimes we don't like our spouse, sometimes we don't like our kids, and yet you still say, hey, I made the commitment, I'm going to stay true to this commitment. That's the right thing to do, even though I don't want to do it. Like, you don't ditch out on those types of commitments. But when it comes to things like career or something, you might have your parents saying, oh, why don't you go get this kind of job, or ditch your business and get a real job or something. Those are the moments where you're like, you know what, I do need to be true to myself in this, and I'm not going to spend the next 30 years of my life doing something that I hate doing. I'm going to find something that I really care about, or I'm going to figure out how to take what I'm doing and really care about what I'm doing and make that interesting.
Right, and that's beautifully said. So thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate your time and the information that you've imparted on us today. Thanks again, and I hope to stay in touch with you, and hope you have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Take care.